The rain came down in sheets that November afternoon, hammering against the bulletproof windows of the black Cadillac Escalade as it crawled through Chicago's congested downtown streets. Inside the vehicle, 6-year-old Alessandra Romano sat perfectly still in the back seat, her small frame wrapped in a cream-colored Burberry coat that cost more than most people earned in a month. Her dark hair was pulled back into a flawless ponytail, held in place by a velvet ribbon that matched her polished Mary Jane shoes. Everything about her appearance screamed precision, control, wealth, but it was her eyes that told the real story. Green as sea glass and twice as cold, they tracked the world outside her window with an expression no child should wear. Contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt. A woman pushed a shopping cart filled with plastic bags across the crosswalk, her jacket soaked through, hair plastered to her face. Alessi's lip curled slightly. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly on the corner, sharing a single umbrella, their jeans torn at the knees. Alessi looked away as if the sight personally offended her. A street vendor struggled to secure his hot dog cart against the wind, and she watched with the detached interest someone might give to an insect, mildly curious about its struggle but utterly unconcerned with its outcome. "These people," she murmured, so quietly that the words were almost lost beneath the sound of rain and the low hum of the engine. In the front passenger seat, her father shifted slightly. Vincent Romano was 32 years old, and had the kind of face that photographers would have loved if he'd chosen a different life. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark eyes that could charm or terrify depending on his mood. Today those eyes were focused on his phone, scrolling through messages with the practiced ease of a man who ran an empire from the palm of his hand. An empire that operated in shadows, built on fear, loyalty, and the kind of money that never appeared on tax returns. "Papa," Alessi said, her voice clearer now, cutting through the silence with the confidence of a child who had never been told to wait her turn to speak. "Why do we have to drive through these neighborhoods? Can't Marco take the highway?" Marco, the driver, a man built like a refrigerator with hands that had broken more bones than a hospital emergency room, glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. He knew better than to insert himself into conversations between Vincent Romano and his daughter. Vincent didn't look up from his phone. "Because this is the fastest route, Piccola. The highway is backed up for miles. Accident near the junction. Then we should have taken the helicopter." Alessi crossed her arms, a gesture that would have been adorable on any other 6-year-old, but somehow looked imperious on her. "I don't like looking at all these people." This time Vincent did glance back at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. There was no anger in his expression, no disappointment. If anything, there was a flicker of recognition, as if he was looking into a mirror that reflected his own childhood. "What's wrong with people, Alessi?" She gestured vaguely toward the window, where the rain-soaked city continued to pass by. "They're dirty, loud, they don't matter." She said it the way someone might comment on the weather, a simple observation of fact, not cruelty. That was what made it worse. She genuinely believed what she was saying. Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he turned back to his phone without responding. What could he say? She was 6 years old and already understood the fundamental truth of their world. There were people who mattered, and people who didn't. There were those who took, and those who gave, predators and prey. He'd taught her that himself, not through words but through every decision he made, every interaction she witnessed, every lesson about survival in a world that didn't forgive weakness. The Escalade turned onto a narrower street, the neighborhood shifting from commercial downtown to something more residential. The buildings here were older, shorter, pressed together like books on a crowded shelf. Small businesses lined the ground floors, a laundromat with fogged windows, a bodega with hand-painted signs advertising 2-liter sodas for $1.99, a nail salon with a flickering neon sign, and there, wedged between a pawn shop and a liquor store with bars on the windows, was Rosie's Diner. The establishment looked like it had been frozen in time somewhere around 1985. The exterior was painted a faded turquoise that might have been cheerful once but now just looked tired. A vintage neon sign hung above the door, Rosie's in cursive script with diner underneath in block letters. Half the letters were burnt out, so it actually read Rosie's Diner, giving it an almost melancholy appearance. The large windows were steamed up from the warmth inside meeting the cold rain outside. But through the condensation, Alessi could make out movement, people sitting at booths, someone behind a counter, the general bustle of life happening. Marco pulled the Escalade to a stop directly in front of the diner, the SUV so large and out of place on this street that it might as well have been a spaceship. Through the rain-streaked windows, Alessi could see people inside the diner turning to look, their conversations pausing as they registered the vehicle's presence. In this neighborhood, a car like theirs meant one of three things: law enforcement, someone very lost, or something else entirely, something dangerous. Vincent pocketed his phone and reached for the door handle. "Stay in the car, Alessi, I'll only be 15 minutes. "No." The word came out flat. "Absolute. I'm coming with you." Vincent turned to look at his daughter, really look at her, and something passed between them. A silent battle of wills that had become increasingly common in recent months. Alessi had inherited more than just his eye color and his last name. She'd inherited his stubborn refusal to be told what to do, his need to understand and control every situation, his fundamental inability to simply wait patiently while life happened around him. "It's raining," Vincent said, his tone reasonable but firm. "You'll get wet, you'll be bored, stay with Marco." "I won't get wet because Marco will hold the umbrella." Alessi leaned forward, her green eyes locked on her father's. "And I won't be bored because I'll be with you. I'm coming." From the driver's seat, Marco cleared his throat softly. "Boss, the meeting—" "I know." Vincent's response was clipped. He looked at his daughter for another long moment, then sighed in a way that made him seem much older than 32. "Fine, but you sit quietly. You don't speak unless spoken to. And when I say it's time to leave, we leave. Understood?" Alessi's face didn't light up with victory or pleasure. She simply nodded once, already unbuckling her seatbelt with the efficiency of someone who'd won exactly what she expected to win. "Understood." Marco retrieved a large black umbrella from the front seat and stepped out into the rain first, moving with surprising grace for a man his size. He circled the vehicle, opening Vincent's door and then Alessi's, holding the umbrella high enough to shelter them both as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The rain was cold, driven almost horizontal by the November wind, and even beneath the umbrella's protection, Alessi felt mist settle on her face like tiny pinpricks. The diner's door was heavy, the kind with a pneumatic closer that wheezed when pushed open. A small bell chimed as they entered, an actual brass bell mounted above the doorframe, not an electronic chime. The sound was cheerful, incongruous with the group that had just walked in. The warmth hit Alessi first. After the biting cold outside, the diner's interior felt almost stifling, the air thick with humidity from wet coats and the steam rising from coffee cups. Then came the smells. Coffee, definitely, strong and slightly burnt, but also grease from the griddle, something sweet that might have been pancakes or waffles, the sharp tang of vinegar from pickles, the yeasty smell of bread toasting. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made Alessi's nose wrinkle instinctively. The diner was exactly what Alessi had expected and somehow worse. The floor was checkered linoleum, black and white tiles that might have been pristine decades ago, but were now scuffed and worn. The pattern faded in the high-traffic areas. The booths were upholstered in red vinyl, patched in places with duct tape where the material had cracked and split. The tables were laminate, their surfaces marked with the ghosts of water rings and scratches. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh clinical glow that made everyone look slightly washed out. But it was full. Nearly every booth was occupied, every stool at the counter claimed. Working-class people on their lunch breaks, construction workers still in their dusty jeans and high-vis vests, nurses in scrubs with hospital ID badges clipped to their pockets, delivery drivers checking their phones between bites, an elderly couple sharing a single slice of pie. The noise level was substantial, silverware clinking against plates, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, a radio somewhere playing oldies at a volume just below obnoxious, the constant hiss and sizzle from the kitchen. The moment Vincent Romano walked in, that noise didn't stop exactly, but it changed. Conversations continued, but eyes flickered toward the door. People who'd been laughing went quiet. The elderly couple sharing pie suddenly found their dessert fascinating. It wasn't fear, exactly. Or not just fear. It was recognition. Even those who didn't know who Vincent was specifically could recognize what he represented. Power, danger, the kind of man you didn't stare at directly, like he was the sun, and looking too long might blind you. Marco stationed himself just inside the door, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room with the methodical attention of someone trained to identify threats. His jacket was open just enough that anyone paying attention could see the bulge at his hip. Most people weren't paying attention. Most people were very deliberately not paying attention. Vincent's hand rested lightly on Alessi's shoulder, guiding her deeper into the diner. She walked with her chin up, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her. They moved over the other patrons with that same cold contempt she'd shown for the people on the streets. These people, her eyes said. These dirty, loud, ordinary people. A man in a wrinkled suit sat alone in a booth near the back, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He looked up as Vincent approached, his face carefully arranged into an expression of casual friendliness that didn't quite reach his eyes. Vincent. Right on time. Tony. Vincent slid into the booth across from the man, his movements fluid and controlled. He gestured for Alessi to sit beside him, and she did, her small body rigid as she perched on the edge of the vinyl seat, as far from the backrest as possible, as if she was afraid the worn material might somehow contaminate her expensive coat. Tony glanced at Alessi with poorly concealed surprise. Didn't realize this was a family meeting. It's not. She insisted on coming. Vincent's tone made it clear the topic wasn't open for discussion. You said you had information about the shipment? As the two men began talking in low voices, using words that meant nothing to Alessi, but clearly meant everything to them. Dates, locations, percentages, names she didn't recognize. She let her attention wander. The booth they occupied was identical to all the others. Cracked vinyl, laminate table, a small jukebox selector mounted on the wall that probably hadn't worked since before she was born. Someone had carved initials into the table's edge. MT plus JR, surrounded by a lopsided heart. Alessi traced the carving with one finger, her expression disdainful. How primitive, how pedestrian. She turned her attention to the other patrons instead, studying them the way a scientist might study specimens under a microscope. Interesting perhaps, but fundamentally inferior. The construction workers at the counter were laughing about something, their voices too loud, their gestures too expansive. One of them had dirt literally ground into the creases of his hands. Alessi's lip curled. The nurses looked exhausted, both of them staring into their coffee cups like they were searching for answers at the bottom. Weak, Alessi thought. If they can't handle their jobs, they should find better ones. The elderly couple was feeding each other bites of pie, and Alessi found the public display of affection somehow embarrassing. Didn't they have any dignity? Can I get you folks anything? The voice came from directly beside their booth, and Alessi turned her head to find a woman standing there with a notepad in one hand and a pot of coffee in the other. She was wearing the diner's uniform, a teal dress with a white apron, both showing their age but clean, pressed. A name tag pinned to her chest read Maya, in faded letters. Alessi's first impression was that the woman was old. Not grandmother old, but adult old, which to a 6-year-old was basically the same thing. She was probably in her late 20s, though the kind of tired that lived behind her eyes made her seem older. Her hair was dark, almost black, pulled back into a practical ponytail that still managed to look nice, somehow. Not fancy, not styled, just nice. Her face was what adults would call pretty, high cheekbones, full lips, warm brown eyes that had a slight crinkle at the corners, like she smiled often enough for it to leave marks. But it was those eyes that caught Alessi's attention and held it. They weren't cold like her father's could be. They weren't calculating like Tony's. They weren't dull and defeated like so many of the other patrons' eyes. They were warm, genuinely, actively warm, like there was a light source behind them. Maya looked at Vincent first, her professional smile in place. Coffee? Black. 2 sugars. Vincent didn't look up from the papers Tony had spread across the table. Maya's eyes shifted to Tony, who waved her off. I'm good, thanks. Then those warm eyes landed on Alessi, and something in the woman's expression shifted. Not dramatically, nothing that most people would even notice, but Alessi saw it. The professional smile softened into something more genuine. The slight tension in Maya's shoulders eased. It was like watching someone relax without even realizing they were doing it. And what about you, baby? Maya asked, her voice gentle, as natural as breathing. You hungry? The word hit Alessi like a physical thing. Baby. No one called her baby. Her father called her piccola sometimes, which meant little one in Italian, but even that was rare. The household staff called her Miss Alessandra or Miss Romano. Her tutors called her Alessandra, with the kind of crisp formality reserved for someone they were being paid very well to educate. The few children of her father's associates that she encountered called her Alessi, if they called her anything at all, usually with a note of wariness or envy. But baby? Like she was just a child? A normal child, who someone might naturally, casually, affectionately, call baby? Alessi stared at the waitress, her green eyes narrowing slightly. The woman, Maya, according to her name tag, stood there with her notepad and her coffee pot waiting for a response, that gentle expression still on her face. She didn't look nervous, despite the obvious tension that had settled over the diner when Vincent walked in. She didn't look scared, despite Marco's looming presence by the door. She just looked kind. Alessi hated her immediately. Or at least, she wanted to hate her. She was supposed to hate her. This woman was everything Alessi had been taught to look down on. Someone who worked with her hands, who served other people, who wore a uniform with someone else's name embroidered on it, who probably went home to some tiny apartment in some rundown building and worried about bills and groceries and all the pathetic little concerns that regular people had. But something about the way Maya had said, baby, so naturally without thinking, like it was just something you called a little girl because little girls were inherently precious, made Alessi's chest feel strange, tight, uncomfortable. "I'm not hungry," Alessi said, her voice cold and clipped, each word precisely enunciated. She turned her face away from Maya, dismissing her the way she'd seen her father dismiss people 1,000 times. "And I'm not a baby." "Oh, I know you're not a baby," Maya said, and there was something in her voice. Not condescension, not mockery, but a kind of gentle amusement that made Alessi's jaw tighten. "Baby's just a thing I call people sometimes. Doesn't mean anything except that I think you're sweet." Sweet. Alessi's hands curled into fists on her lap beneath the table. She was not sweet. Sweet was for weak people, for people who got taken advantage of, for people who didn't understand how the world really worked. Maya didn't seem bothered by Alessi's hostility. If anything, her smile grew a fraction warmer. "How about some hot chocolate? It's cold out there and I make pretty good hot chocolate. Not the powder stuff. I use real chocolate, milk, a little cinnamon. My daughter loves it." The mention of a daughter surprised Alessi enough that she turned back to look at Maya. This woman had a child? She tried to imagine it and couldn't quite manage it. Maya seemed too young, wasn't the right word. Too tired, maybe. Too worn down by life to have the energy required for a child. "How old is your daughter?" The question came out before Alessi could stop it, and she immediately regretted showing interest. Interest was weakness. Curiosity was vulnerability. Maya's entire face lit up, and Alessi was struck by the transformation. The tired woman who'd walked up to their booth had been replaced by someone brighter, more alive, more there. "She's 4. Emma. She's my whole world." Maya said it with such simple, absolute sincerity that Alessi felt something twist in her chest. "She'd probably be about your age in a couple years. You look around 6? "I'm 6, Alessi confirmed, then immediately wished she hadn't. What was she doing? Having a conversation with the help. Her father was right there, deep in discussion with Tony. But if he turned his attention to this interaction, what would he think? That she was fraternizing with someone beneath her station? That she was being weak? 6 is such a good age, Maya said. And again there was that genuine warmth that Alessi didn't know what to do with. Emma's dying to be 6. She thinks 6-year-olds know everything. Maya's eyes crinkled at the corners, a smile playing at her lips. "She's got a big imagination. Always telling me stories about princesses and dragons and adventures. Dragons weren't real. Princesses were historical figures of no particular importance. Adventures were just dangerous situations that foolish people put themselves in." Alessi wanted to say all of this, wanted to correct this woman's obvious ignorance, wanted to establish her superiority in this conversation. Instead, she heard herself say, "I don't like stories." It was a lie. She did like stories. Or she used to, before her father decided she was too old for fairy tales and started giving her books about history and strategy and the real world instead. She used to have a nanny who would read to her every night. Elaborate, fantastical stories about magical kingdoms and brave heroes and happy endings. Then that nanny had made some mistake, said something she shouldn't have, or failed to do something she should have, and one day she simply wasn't there anymore. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. And the new nanny didn't read stories. The new nanny stood silently in the corner of Alessi's room until she fell asleep, then left like a ghost. Maya's expression softened even further, if that was possible, and Alessi realized with growing irritation that this woman could apparently see straight through her. "That's okay. Not everybody does. But I bet you like something. Everybody likes something." "I like winning," Alessi said, lifting her chin. It was true. It was the one thing she knew for certain about herself. She liked chess because she could win. She liked the card games her father taught her because she could win. She liked the verbal sparring matches with her tutors because she could win. Winning was the only thing that made sense. The only thing that proved you were better than everyone else. Winning at what? Maya asked, genuinely curious, leaning her hip against the booth in a way that suggested she was settling in for a real conversation, despite the fact that she was clearly working and had other tables to attend to. Everything. Alessi's voice was flat, factual. I don't do things I can't win at. Something flickered across Maya's face. Not pity exactly, but something close to it. Something that made Alessi's spine stiffen defensively. That sounds kind of lonely, Maya said softly. What if you want to do something just because it's fun, even if you're not the best at it? Then you're wasting your time. The response was automatic, something her father had told her 100 times. Time was the one resource you couldn't get back. Every minute spent on activities that didn't make you stronger, smarter, better, was a minute stolen from your own potential. People who do things just for fun are people who don't matter. Maya was quiet for a moment, and Alessi felt a surge of satisfaction. She'd won. She'd established her position, corrected this woman's naive understanding of how the world worked, proved her superiority. The waitress would walk away now, probably offended, definitely knowing her place. But Maya didn't walk away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying Alessi with those warm brown eyes. And when she spoke, her voice was impossibly gentle. Oh, baby. Somebody taught you that. And whoever it was, they were wrong. The words hit Alessi like a slap. Not because they were cruel, they weren't. But because they were delivered with such complete conviction, such absolute certainty, that for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, Alessi wondered if maybe, no. This woman didn't know anything. She worked in a diner. She served coffee and pancakes to people who probably didn't even tip well. She wore a uniform and called strangers baby, and thought that fun mattered. She was nobody. She was nothing. She didn't understand the real world, didn't understand power, didn't understand survival. You don't know anything about me, Alessi said, her voice sharp despite her best efforts to keep it neutral. You don't know anything about my life. You're right, I don't, Maya agreed easily without defensiveness. I just know you're 6 years old, sitting in a diner on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, telling me you only do things you can win at. And I know what I see when I look at you. She paused, and Alessi found herself holding her breath, waiting. I see a little girl who maybe needs some hot chocolate and someone to tell her that it's okay to just be a kid sometimes. Alessi, her father's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Vincent had finished his conversation with Tony, and was looking at her with that expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly, but not approval either. Behave yourself. Alessi's spine went even straighter if that was possible. I am behaving myself, Papa. Vincent's eyes shifted to Maya, and Alessi saw the waitress's expression change almost imperceptibly. The warmth didn't leave her eyes exactly, but it was joined by something else. Caution, maybe, or awareness. Maya understood who Vincent was, or at least understood enough to know that she was standing in the presence of someone dangerous. But she didn't look scared. She just looked careful. Sorry if she's giving you trouble, Vincent said, his voice carrying that smooth, dangerous politeness he used with people he wanted something from, or people he was about to eliminate. She's at that age where she's testing boundaries. Oh, she's no trouble at all, Maya said, and the ease in her voice suggested she either didn't recognize the threat in Vincent's tone or didn't care. Just making conversation. So can I get that hot chocolate for her? And maybe some crackers or something? Kids need to eat. Vincent looked at Alessi, one eyebrow raised in question. Alessi wanted to refuse, wanted to dismiss this woman and her hot chocolate and her casual familiarity, wanted to prove that she didn't need anything from anyone, especially not someone like Maya. But she was cold. The diner was warm, but she was still cold from the walk from the car, and the idea of something hot to drink was suddenly very appealing. And more than that, though she wouldn't admit it, could barely acknowledge it to herself, she wanted to see if Maya would call her baby again. Fine, Alessi said, trying to sound bored and mostly succeeding. But I want whipped cream. Maya's smile returned full force, bright enough to compete with the harsh fluorescent lights. Of course, baby. Whipped cream, coming right up. There it was again. Baby, said so casually, so naturally, like it cost nothing to be kind to a stranger's child. Like Alessi was just a normal 6-year-old deserving of affection instead of the daughter of Vincent Romano, someone to be feared or avoided, or at best, carefully handled. Maya walked away toward the kitchen, her ponytail swinging slightly with each step, leaving Alessi feeling strangely disoriented. Vincent had already turned back to Tony, resuming their conversation in those same low, serious tones. Marco remained by the door, still scanning the room. The other patrons had returned to their meals and their lives, the brief disruption of Vincent Romano's arrival already fading into background noise. And Alessi sat there in the worn vinyl booth, her expensive coat still buttoned up to her throat, her hands folded primly in her lap, trying to understand why a single word from a waitress had unsettled her more than anything had in months. The diner continued its usual chaos around her. The construction workers at the counter had moved from whatever they'd been laughing about to an argument about football. The exhausted nurses had been joined by a third, and they were now comparing horror stories about their shifts in medical shorthand. Alessi didn't understand. The elderly couple had finished their pie and were now just sitting together, holding hands across the table, not speaking. The radio had switched from oldies to some contemporary pop song that Alessi didn't recognize, but that several patrons were unconsciously humming along to. It was so ordinary, so mundane, so completely removed from Alessi's normal world of carefully controlled environments and calculated interactions, and the constant weight of expectation and legacy. She hated it. Didn't she? Maya returned a few minutes later with a large mug of hot chocolate that she placed carefully in front of Alessi. The whipped cream was piled high, dusted with what looked like cinnamon, and there was a candy cane hooked over the rim, even though it wasn't even Thanksgiving yet, let alone Christmas. The mug itself was white ceramic, chipped slightly at the base but clean, and it radiated heat that Alessi could feel before she even touched it. "There you go, baby," Maya said, setting down a napkin and a spoon beside the mug. "Careful. It's hot. You might want to wait a minute before you drink it." Alessi stared at the hot chocolate. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her something. Oh, the household staff prepared her meals, obviously. But that was different. They were paid to do it, instructed to do it, and they presented the food with the detached efficiency of people performing a duty. This felt different. Maya had made this specifically for her, had added the whipped cream and the cinnamon and the candy cane because she thought Alessi might like it, because she wanted Alessi to be happy. It was unsettling. "Say thank you, Alessi," Vincent prompted, not looking up from his papers. "Thank you," Alessi said automatically, the words coming out stiff and formal. Maya's smile didn't waver. "You're very welcome. Let me know if you need anything else, okay?" Then she was gone again, moving to another table where a man in a UPS uniform was signaling for his check. Alessi watched her go, then turned her attention to the hot chocolate. The whipped cream was already starting to melt into the drink, creating swirls of white against the dark brown. She picked up the candy cane and stirred it experimentally, watching the patterns form and dissolve. She took a sip. It was good. Really good. Rich and sweet and warm, the cinnamon adding a subtle spiciness that kept it from being too sugary. The whipped cream added a lightness, a creaminess that made the whole thing feel indulgent, special. Alessi hated that she liked it. Vincent and Tony's meeting stretched on. They were discussing details of some business arrangement that Alessi didn't fully understand and didn't particularly care about. Numbers, locations, timing, contingencies. The language of adults conducting adult business. Normally, Alessi would have tried to follow along, to understand, to learn, because knowledge was power, and power was everything. But today, she found her attention drifting. The hot chocolate had warmed her from the inside out, and with the warmth came a strange sort of drowsiness, a relaxation of the constant vigilance she normally maintained. She watched Maya work. The waitress moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, never rushed but never slow, balancing multiple tasks with the kind of grace that came from doing the same job for a long time. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, cleared plates the moment patrons finished, joked easily with the regulars, handled complaints with patience. A construction worker said something that made her laugh, a real laugh, head thrown back, genuine joy, and Alessi found herself wondering what that felt like, to laugh like that, without calculating whether it was appropriate or strategic or safe. Maya caught Alessi watching her at one point, and instead of looking away or pretending she hadn't noticed, she winked. Actually winked, like they were sharing some secret joke, like they were friends. Alessi quickly looked down at her hot chocolate, her cheeks feeling warm for reasons that had nothing to do with the steam. "All right, we're good," Tony said, gathering his papers and standing. He nodded to Vincent, ignored Alessi completely, and headed for the door, giving Marco a wide berth as he left. Vincent checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, that cost more than most of the cars parked on this street, and frowned slightly. "We need to go. I have another meeting in 40 minutes and traffic's going to be terrible." Alessi looked down at her mug. She'd only drunk about half of it, and it was still warm, still good. The idea of leaving it unfinished felt wasteful, but more than that, it felt like losing something, which was ridiculous. It was just hot chocolate. This was just a diner. That woman was just a waitress. Just, "Can I finish?" Alessi asked, hating how much the question sounded like pleading. Vincent's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You have 5 minutes. Drink it quickly." Alessi obeyed, taking large sips that burned her tongue slightly but filled her mouth with that rich, sweet, spiced warmth. She wanted to savor it, to make it last, but she also didn't want to disappoint her father or make him wait. So she drank quickly, efficiently, the way she did everything. Maya appeared at their table as if summoned by some sixth sense. "All finished? Can I get you the check?" "Please," Vincent said, already pulling out his wallet, not the expensive leather one he used for business, but a smaller money clip that held just cash. He peeled off several bills without counting them, far more than their order had cost, and handed them to Maya. "Keep the change." Maya's eyes widened slightly as she glanced at the bills. "Sir, this is way too much." "It's fine." Vincent was already standing, buttoning his coat. "Consider it appreciation for tolerating my daughter's attitude." Alessi bristled at that, but before she could say anything, Maya was looking at her with those warm eyes again, and the irritation dissolved into something more complicated. "She was lovely," Maya said firmly, and it didn't sound like she was just being polite. It sounded like she meant it. "An absolute pleasure." She looked directly at Alessi, and her voice dropped slightly, becoming more intimate, more personal. "You take care of yourself, baby, okay? And if you ever want more hot chocolate, you know where to find me." Alessi wanted to say something cutting, something that would establish her superiority, and make it clear that she would never come back to this place, would never seek out this woman again, would never need anything from someone like her. Instead, she heard herself say, very quietly, "Okay." Vincent's hand on her shoulder guided her out of the booth and toward the door. Marco fell into step behind them, still alert, still watchful. The other patrons watched them leave with the same mixture of wariness and relief they'd shown when they arrived. The brass bell chimed as the door opened, and then they were back outside, back in the cold rain, back in their world of black SUVs and bulletproof windows and carefully maintained distance from regular life. Marco held the umbrella over them as they walked the few steps to the Escalade. The rain was coming down even harder now, the sky dark despite it being mid-afternoon, the wind sharp enough to cut through Alessi's expensive coat. She slid into the back seat, and her father joined her a moment later. Marco got into the driver's seat, shook the water from the umbrella, and started the engine. As they pulled away from the curb, Alessi turned to look back at the diner. Through the rain-streaked window, she could just make out the interior lights, the movement of people inside, the general sense of life continuing in that small, ordinary space. And there, through the steamed-up window, she thought she saw a figure. Maya, maybe, or maybe just wishful thinking, standing and watching them leave. The Escalade turned the corner, and the diner disappeared from view. Vincent was on his phone again within seconds, already moving on to the next item on his agenda, the next business to conduct, the next problem to solve. For him, the stop at Rosie's diner had been a minor detour, a temporary necessity, already forgotten, but Alessi couldn't forget. She sat in silence as they drove through the rain-soaked streets, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. Inside, though, she was chaos. Inside, she was trying to reconcile the person she knew herself to be, cold, superior, above such things as casual kindness and ordinary conversation, with the person who had felt something warm and confusing and unwelcome when a waitress called her baby. "Papa," she said finally as they merged onto the highway that would take them back to their part of the city, their part of the world. "Can we go back there sometime?" Vincent glanced at her, surprised. "To the diner? Why? Why indeed? Because the hot chocolate was good? Because the booth was warm? Because for 20 minutes she'd felt like something other than Vincent Romano's daughter, weapon in training, future inheritor of an empire built on fear? I liked the hot chocolate, Alessi said, which was true but not the whole truth. And you said you might have more meetings in that area. Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Alessi forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching, without revealing anything beyond casual interest. Finally, he nodded slowly. Maybe. If I have business nearby again, and if you behave yourself. I always behave myself, Alessi said, and it came out sounding more petulant than she'd intended, more like an actual 6-year-old than the miniature adult she tried so hard to be. Vincent's lips quirked in what might have been amusement. Yes, Piccola, you do. He went back to his phone, the conversation apparently over. Alessi turned to look out her window, watching the city pass by, the rain turning everything into watercolor smears of gray and brown, and occasional splashes of neon. She thought about Maya's smile, the way she'd moved through the diner with such purpose and ease, the way she'd talked about her daughter Emma with complete, unguarded love. She thought about the words Maya had spoken. Somebody taught you that, and whoever it was, they were wrong. Wrong. The idea that her father might be wrong about something, that the fundamental truths she'd been raised with might not actually be true, was both terrifying and thrilling. Because if her father was wrong about that, what else might he be wrong about? And if he was wrong, what did that mean about everything Alessi had built her understanding of the world on? But no, Maya was the one who was wrong. She had to be. She was a waitress in a diner, struggling to raise a daughter on her own, working long hours for tips, probably one missed paycheck away from catastrophe. That wasn't strength, that was survival, barely. And survival without dignity wasn't worth anything. Except Maya hadn't seemed to lack dignity. She'd seemed tired, yes, but not defeated, worn but not broken. And when she smiled, when she talked about Emma, when she called Alessi baby with such natural affection, she'd seemed more alive than anyone in Alessi's carefully constructed world. It was confusing. It was uncomfortable. It was, I don't like her, Alessi announced suddenly, to no one in particular. Vincent glanced up from his phone. Who? The waitress. Maya. Alessi crossed her arms. She was too familiar. She didn't know her place. Vincent made a non-committal sound. She seemed nice enough to me. Nice is for weak people. Sometimes, Piccola. Vincent's voice was thoughtful. And sometimes, nice is the most dangerous thing of all, because it makes you want to trust it. Alessi considered this. It made sense. Maya's kindness was a trap, obviously. A way to lower her guard, to make her vulnerable. That's why she'd felt so uncomfortable, so off balance. Not because there was anything genuine about Maya's warmth, but because it was a manipulation, a strategy, just executed so well that Alessi had almost fallen for it. Almost. I won't fall for it, Alessi said, more to herself than to her father. I'm smarter than that. I know you are. Vincent's voice carried absolute confidence. You're a Romano. We don't fall for anything. The Escalade pulled up to the gates of their estate 20 minutes later. The gates opened automatically, recognizing the vehicle, and they drove up the long, tree-lined driveway to the house. A mansion, really, though no one who lived there called it that. It was just home. 3 stories of limestone and glass, immaculately maintained gardens even in November, security cameras disguised as landscape lighting, guard posts hidden among the trees. This was Alessi's world. This was real, clean, controlled, safe behind high walls and sophisticated security systems. Not some chaotic diner where people crowded together and laughed too loudly, and waitresses called strangers baby, like it meant something. She got out of the car and walked up the steps to the front door, which opened before she reached it. The household manager, Mrs. Chen, stood there with the same neutral expression she always wore. Welcome home, Miss Alessandra. Would you like a snack before your piano lesson? No, thank you, Alessi said automatically. Her stomach was still warm and full of hot chocolate. What time is my lesson? 30 minutes, your tutor is already here setting up in the music room. Alessi nodded and headed for the stairs, intending to go to her room and change out of her coat. But halfway up she paused and turned back. Mrs. Chen, do we have cinnamon? Mrs. Chen's eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch, the most emotion Alessi had ever seen her display. Of course, Miss Alessandra, in the kitchen pantry. Would you like something prepared with cinnamon? No, I just wondered. Alessi continued up the stairs, leaving Mrs. Chen looking mildly puzzled in the foyer. In her room, a space larger than many people's apartments, decorated in whites and creams and pale grays, everything in its place, everything perfect. Alessi hung up her coat and sat on the edge of her bed. From here she could see out her window to the gardens below, the city skyline in the distance, the whole world laid out beneath her like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. She thought about Maya's tiny apartment, because it had to be tiny, didn't it? With Emma's drawings on the fridge and probably toys scattered everywhere and all the warm, messy chaos of a real life being lived. She thought about Maya standing in that diner calling her baby, offering her hot chocolate and kindness for no reason, no strategy, no gain. "I don't need her," Alessi said to her empty room. "I don't need anyone." It was true. She'd been taught to be self-sufficient, independent, strong. Romano women didn't need anyone. They took what they wanted and discarded what they didn't. They won. But as Alessi sat there in her perfect room, in her perfect house, in her perfect life, she found her fingers tracing patterns on her bedspread, the shape of a mug, the swirl of whipped cream, the smile of a woman who had looked at her and seen not a future mob princess or a cold, calculating child, but just a little girl who might need some hot chocolate and someone to be kind to her. The word echoed in Alessi's mind, uncomfortable and warm and impossible to ignore: baby. For the first time in her 6 years of life, Alessandra Romano wondered if being strong meant she had to be alone, and for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure she knew the answer. Outside her window, the rain continued to fall on the city, washing everything clean, blurring the lines between the world she knew and the world she'd glimpsed that afternoon in a worn vinyl booth with a chipped mug of hot chocolate and a waitress who smiled like she meant it. 3 days later, Alessi asked her father when they would have business near that diner again. He looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes and said they might have a reason to go back in a week or so. Alessi nodded, pretending indifference, pretending she didn't care. But she did care, and that was what scared her most of all. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy November afternoon at Rosie's diner, and Alessandra Romano had become a child obsessed. Not that anyone would know it to look at her. She maintained her usual composure through her daily routines, piano lessons where her fingers moved across the keys with mechanical precision, tutoring sessions where she absorbed information like a sponge and regurgitated it flawlessly, dinners with her father where she sat straight-backed and silent unless spoken to. On the surface, she was the same cold, controlled 6-year-old she'd always been, but inside was different. Inside, she couldn't stop thinking about warm brown eyes and the word baby spoken with such casual affection. Inside, she replayed every moment of that visit over and over, analyzing it like it was a chess game she needed to win. Inside, she was planning. The problem was her father. Vincent Romano was many things: dangerous, calculating, powerful, but he was not stupid, and he knew his daughter better than anyone. So when Alessi began manufacturing reasons why they should drive through that particular neighborhood, when she suddenly developed opinions about the route Marco should take, when she casually mentioned that the hot chocolate at that diner had been exceptional, and perhaps they should stop by again, Vincent had simply looked at her with those knowing eyes and said nothing, which was somehow worse than if he'd forbidden it outright. But business was business, and Vincent's empire required constant maintenance, constant meetings, constant presence in places throughout the city, and eventually, inevitably, one of those places was close enough to Rosie's diner that stopping by became convenient rather than suspicious. It was a Tuesday again, mid-December now, and the city had transformed into something that might have been magical if Alessi had been the kind of child who believed in magic. Holiday decorations hung from streetlights, wreaths and bows and strings of lights that would illuminate after dark. Store windows displayed elaborate winter scenes. Salvation Army volunteers rang bells on corners, their red kettles collecting donations from people who probably couldn't afford to give but did anyway. Alessi watched it all from her usual position in the back of the Escalade, her expression neutral, but her heart beating faster than normal. They were heading toward the diner. She knew they were. She'd heard her father on the phone earlier arranging to meet someone named Sal, and she'd memorized enough of her father's business geography to know that Sal operated out of a social club only 4 blocks from Rosie's. Sure enough, after the meeting, which took place in a dim, smoke-filled room above a bakery where men spoke in Italian and kept their voices low, Vincent checked his watch and said, "You hungry, Piccola?" Alessi had learned enough about strategy to know that appearing too eager was a mistake. "I could eat," she said, her tone carefully disinterested. Vincent's lip quirked slightly. "There's that diner nearby, the one with the hot chocolate you liked. If you want to go there, that's fine." Alessi looked out the window as if the destination meant nothing to her. The hot chocolate was acceptable. Acceptable. Vincent's voice carried amusement now. High praise from you. Marco navigated the familiar streets, and Alessi felt her chest tighten as they turned the corner and Rosie's diner came into view. It looked exactly the same. The faded turquoise exterior, the half-burnt-out neon sign, the steamed-up windows revealing movement inside. But somehow, it looked different too. Less shabby maybe. Or perhaps Alessi was just seeing it differently. The brass bell chimed as they entered, and once again, the diner's warmth and noise enveloped them. It was busier this time, every booth filled, people standing near the door waiting for seats. The radio played Christmas music, something about silver bells and city sidewalks, and someone had hung tinsel around the counter in a half-hearted attempt at festive decoration. And there, weaving through the chaos with that same practiced grace, was Maya. She wore the same teal uniform, though this time she'd added a small Santa hat that sat slightly askew on her head, probably a requirement from management rather than personal choice. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail. Her expression held the same patient tiredness. But when she looked up and saw Alessi standing there beside her father, her entire face transformed. "Well, look who's back," Maya said, and her smile was so genuine, so warm that Alessi felt something crack in her chest. "I was wondering if I'd see you again, baby." There it was. That word, baby. And it still made Alessi feel the same confusing mixture of irritation and something else, something softer that she didn't have a name for. "We were in the neighborhood," Alessi said, her voice carefully neutral. "Papa had business. Lucky for me." Maya grabbed 2 menus from behind the counter. "I've got a booth opening up in just a minute. Can you wait?" Vincent nodded, and they stood near the door while Marco took his usual position against the wall. The other patrons gave them space without being asked. That same instinctive awareness of danger that Vincent carried with him everywhere. But Maya seemed immune to it. Or perhaps she simply chose not to acknowledge it. She cleared a booth with efficient movements, wiped down the table, and gestured for them to sit. "So," Maya said, pulling out her notepad. "Hot chocolate for you again, baby?" Alessi wanted to say no, wanted to order something different, something that would prove she wasn't here specifically for the hot chocolate, specifically for this moment. But she heard herself say, "Yes, please, with whipped cream." And the cinnamon? Alessi had forgotten about the cinnamon. The fact that Maya remembered made her stomach flip. "Yes. You got it." Maya turned to Vincent. "And for you, sir?" "Coffee. Black." Vincent paused. "And whatever your lunch special is today. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. I'll get that right out for you." Maya scribbled on her notepad, then looked back at Alessi. "You hungry too, baby?" "Can't survive on just hot chocolate." "I'm not very hungry," Alessi said, which was true. Her stomach felt too tight for food. Maya tilted her head, studying Alessi with those warm eyes that seemed to see too much. "How about some soup? I make a pretty good chicken noodle. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and it'll make you feel good." The idea that food could make you feel good, not just satisfied or full, but actually good, emotionally better, was foreign to Alessi. Food was fuel. You ate what was nutritious and appropriate for your size and age. You didn't eat for feelings. But she found herself nodding. "Okay. Perfect." Maya's smile brightened even more. "Be right back with your drinks." As Maya walked away, Vincent looked at his daughter with an expression Alessi couldn't quite read. "You like her?" It wasn't a question, but Alessi answered anyway. "I don't know her well enough to like or dislike her." "You're 6 years old, Alessi. You don't need to analyze everything." Vincent's voice was softer than usual. "If you like the waitress, you can just like her. You taught me that liking people without reason is dangerous," Alessi pointed out. "You said people will use your affection against you." "I did say that." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "And I meant it. But there's a difference between business associates and a waitress who makes you hot chocolate." "What's the difference?" Vincent considered this. "One of them wants something from you, the other one is just being kind." "Everyone wants something," Alessi said, repeating another of her father's lessons. "Even kind people. Especially kind people." "You're probably right." Vincent pulled out his phone, already shifting his attention to the next item on his mental checklist. "But you're also 6. Maybe it's okay to accept kindness at face value once in a while." Alessi didn't know what to do with that permission, so she said nothing. She occupied herself by studying the other patrons instead. An elderly man sat alone at the counter, eating pie and reading a newspaper. A young couple shared a booth, holding hands across the table while their food got cold. Three women in business attire laughed loudly over salads, clearly on lunch break from some nearby office. Regular people, ordinary people, people who probably went home to regular apartments and ordinary lives and never thought about security systems or business empires or the weight of legacy and expectation. Maya returned with their drinks. Vincent's coffee in a plain white mug, Alessi's hot chocolate in the same chipped mug as before, the whipped cream piled high and dusted with cinnamon, a candy cane hooked over the rim, even though Alessi hadn't eaten the one from last time. There you go, baby. Maya set the mug down carefully. Your soup will be out in just a few minutes. Thank you, Alessi said, and this time it came out less stiff, more genuine. Maya paused and something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. You're very welcome. You know, you have beautiful manners for someone so young. I've been trained to be polite, Alessi said, which was true but sounded wrong as soon as the words left her mouth. Made it sound like she was a dog learning tricks rather than a child learning social graces. Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. Trained? That's an interesting word choice. Alessi felt heat rise in her cheeks. Embarrassment, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Before she could figure out how to respond, Vincent intervened smoothly. She has tutors, very strict about manners and behavior. Ah, Maya nodded. Well, they're doing a good job. You're a credit to them, baby. After Maya left to attend to other tables, Alessi sipped her hot chocolate and tried to understand why being called a credit to her tutors felt disappointing. Shouldn't she be proud? Shouldn't she want to reflect well on her education, her upbringing, her family? But what she wanted, she realized with uncomfortable clarity, was for Maya to see her as something other than the product of careful training, as someone real, someone individual, someone worth knowing beyond her manners and her family name. The thought was ridiculous, dangerous even, but Alessi couldn't quite shake it. The visits became regular after that. Not weekly, that would have been too obvious, too suspicious, but every 2 weeks or so Vincent would have business near the diner, and they would stop by, sometimes for a quick meal, sometimes just for drinks. Always with Marco standing guard by the door. Always with other patrons giving them wary distance. Always with Maya treating Alessi like she was something precious. Each visit, Alessi learned something new. She learned that Maya worked double shifts most days, arriving at 6 in the morning and not leaving until 10 at night. That she'd been working at Rosie's for almost 3 years. That before this, she'd worked at a different diner. And before that, at a fast food place. Always in food service. Always on her feet, always serving others. She learned that Emma was in preschool now, and that Maya's mother watched her in the afternoons until Maya could pick her up. That Emma loved dinosaurs and had recently decided she wanted to be a paleontologist, though she couldn't pronounce the word correctly yet. That Maya was saving money, slowly, painfully slowly, to eventually move to a better neighborhood with better schools. She learned that Maya's husband had left when Emma was 6 months old. Just walked out one day and never came back. That Maya had tracked him down once to try to get child support, but he'd moved to a different state and changed his phone number and made himself impossible to find. That Maya didn't talk about him with bitterness exactly, but with a kind of weary resignation, like he was just one more thing that hadn't worked out the way she'd hoped. Alessi learned these things in fragments, pieces of conversation that Maya shared easily, without self-pity or shame. And with each fragment, Alessi's understanding of the world shifted slightly, because Maya worked harder than anyone Alessi had ever met, harder than her father's associates, harder than the household staff, harder than the tutors and bodyguards and lawyers. Maya worked 2 jobs and raised a daughter alone and still managed to smile at strangers and call them baby, and make hot chocolate with extra cinnamon because she remembered a little girl had liked it that way. And Maya had nothing. No security, no power, no protection. She lived paycheck to paycheck, one illness or car breakdown away from catastrophe. By all of Vincent Romano's metrics, Maya was failing at life. She was exactly the kind of person Alessi had been taught to look down on, someone who let life happen to them instead of taking control, someone who settled for survival instead of dominance, someone who cared more about feelings than winning. But Maya didn't seem like a failure. She seemed, happy wasn't quite the right word, content maybe. Or at peace with her choices. She'd chosen Emma over an easier life. She'd chosen kindness over bitterness. She'd chosen to keep going, even when going was hard. It was December 28th, when everything changed. The diner was quiet, the lull between Christmas and New Year's when most people were still home with family or out of town entirely. Only a handful of tables were occupied, a few regulars nursing coffee, a family with young children sharing pancakes, a man working on a laptop in the corner booth. Vincent's meeting had run long, and by the time they arrived at Rosie's, it was almost 8 in the evening. The sky outside was full dark, the streetlights casting orange pools on the sidewalk, snow beginning to fall in lazy spirals. Maya looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her smile, while still present, seemed to require more effort than usual. But when she saw Alessi, that smile became more genuine. "Hey there, baby. You're here late tonight." "Papa's meeting took longer than expected," Alessi said, sliding into an empty booth. The diner was so quiet that their voices seemed too loud, echoing slightly in the space. "Well, I'm glad you're here. It's been a slow night." "Nice to see a friendly face." Maya pulled out her notepad. "The usual?" Alessi nodded. But before Maya could leave, she asked, "Where's Emma tonight?" Maya's expression softened the way it always did when someone mentioned her daughter. "With my mom. They're having a sleepover, making cookies, watching movies. Emma loves staying with Grandma." She paused. "Why do you ask, baby?" Alessi shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Just wondered. You talk about her a lot." "I do, don't I?" Maya laughed softly. "She's my favorite subject, along with you, actually. I tell her about you sometimes." Alessi's head snapped up, surprise breaking through her careful composure. "You do?" "Sure. I tell her about the smart, beautiful little girl who comes to the diner and orders hot chocolate with extra whipped cream." Maya's eyes were warm. "I told her maybe someday you two could meet. I think you'd like each other." The idea of meeting Emma, of being introduced not as Alessandra Romano, daughter of Vincent Romano, but simply as the girl who liked hot chocolate, made Alessi's chest feel strange, tight and warm and confused. "Maybe," Alessi said, non-committal, but inside she was thinking, yes, I want to meet her. I want to see what a 4-year-old with a mother like you turns out like. I want to know if she's as warm as you are. Maya went to put in their order, and Vincent, who had been unusually quiet, said, "She's good with you." "What do you mean?" "Maya, she's good with you. Patient. Kind." Vincent's voice was thoughtful. "You don't get much of that. Kindness without agenda." Alessi wanted to argue, to insist that she didn't need kindness, that she was fine without it, but lying to her father had never worked. "I don't understand her," she admitted instead. "She works so hard and has so little, and she's still happy. How is that possible?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Some people find happiness in things that don't cost money, Piccola. Family, purpose, making other people smile." He paused. "Your mother was like that." Alessi froze. Her father never talked about her mother. Never. She died when Alessi was 2 years old. Too young for Alessi to remember her face, or her voice, or anything, except the vaguest sense of loss that might have been real memory, or might have been imagination. "She was?" Alessi's voice came out smaller than she intended. "She was." Vincent's expression was distant, remembering. "She used to volunteer at a soup kitchen every Sunday. Drove me crazy. I'd tell her it was dangerous, that someone might recognize her, use her to get to me, but she'd just smile and say that some things were worth the risk." He looked at Alessi. "Maya reminds me of her, not in appearance, but in spirit, I suppose." Before Alessi could process that revelation, before she could ask the 1,000 questions suddenly crowding her mind, the diner's door burst open. 3 men entered, and immediately the atmosphere changed. They were young, early 20s maybe, wearing designer jackets and expensive sneakers and the kind of jewelry that announced they had money but not taste. More importantly, they carried themselves with false confidence, the aggressive swagger of people trying to prove they were dangerous. Marco straightened slightly by the door, his hand moving subtly toward his jacket. Vincent's expression didn't change, but Alessi felt him go still in a way that meant he was calculating, assessing, preparing. The 3 men took a booth near the front, laughing too loudly at something one of them said. Maya approached them with her notepad and her professional smile, and Alessi watched one of them, the one with gold chains and a designer watch, look Maya up and down in a way that made Alessi's hands curl into fists. Well, Goldchain said, his voice carrying through the quiet diner. "Aren't you a pretty thing? What's your name, sweetheart?" "Maya." Her voice was polite but cool, professional. "What can I get you, gentlemen? How about your number?" This from one of the others who thought he was being clever. His friends laughed. "Coffee and menus," Maya said, her smile never wavering, but her eyes going flat. I'll give you a minute to decide what you want to eat. I already know what I want, Gold Chain said, and his meaning was clear enough that even Alessi, at 6 years old, understood the implication. Maya's expression didn't change. She'd clearly dealt with this before, many times. I'll bring your coffee, she said, and turned to walk away. Gold Chain reached out and grabbed her wrist. It wasn't violent exactly. He didn't pull hard or hurt her, but it was possessive, presumptuous, the kind of gesture that assumed he had the right to touch her, to stop her, to demand her attention. Everything happened very quickly after that. Marco moved from the door, his bulk suddenly between Maya and the booth. Vincent stood, his movement fluid and controlled. But there was something in his face that Alessi had only seen a few times before. Cold rage, barely leashed. And Alessi, without thinking, without calculating, without considering consequences, stood up on her seat and shouted, "Let her go." The diner went completely silent. Even the radio seemed to quiet. Every eye turned to the small 6-year-old girl standing on a vinyl booth seat, her face flushed, her hands clenched into fists, her green eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name but felt burning in her chest. Gold Chain looked at her, surprised, and then amused. "What's this? You got a tiny bodyguard, sweetheart?" I said, "Let her go." Alessi's voice shook slightly, but not with fear, with fury. "She's not something you get to touch." Maya had gone very still, her eyes wide. Vincent's hand landed gently on Alessi's shoulder, not pulling her down, just resting there, a presence, a reminder. "Alessi," he said quietly. "Sit down." "Not until he lets her go," Alessi said, and she was vaguely aware that she was being ridiculous, that she was a 6-year-old girl defending a grown woman, that she had no power here, no ability to enforce her demands. But she couldn't sit down, couldn't stay quiet, couldn't let this happen to Maya, who had never been anything but kind to her, who called her baby and made her hot chocolate and smiled like Alessi mattered. Gold Chain's amusement faded as he registered Vincent's presence, really looked at him for the first time. Recognition dawned slowly, not of Vincent specifically perhaps, but of what he represented. The expensive suit, the quiet confidence, the giant bodyguard, the whole package that screamed danger and power. "We don't want any trouble," Gold Chain said, releasing Maya's wrist and raising his hand slightly. "Just having some fun." "Fun?" Vincent repeated, his voice flat. "You think grabbing women is fun?" "I didn't grab. I just—" Gold Chain was scrambling now, trying to de-escalate. "Look, man, we're just—" "You're leaving." Vincent's voice carried absolute authority. Now. The three men exchanged glances, clearly debating whether their pride was worth whatever might happen if they stayed. Common sense won. They stood, threw some bills on the table, probably too much guilt money, and headed for the door. Marco stepped aside to let them pass, his expression promising severe consequences if they ever came back. The brass bell chimed as they left, and then the diner was quiet again, the other patrons carefully not staring but definitely aware of everything that had just happened. Maya was still standing there, her hand unconsciously rubbing the wrist where Gold Chain had grabbed her. She looked at Vincent, then at Marco, then at Alessi, still standing on the booth seat. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Vincent interrupted. "Nobody touches people without permission. Nobody." Maya's eyes were shining slightly, and Alessi realized with shock that she was fighting back tears. "Still, thank you." Vincent nodded once, then looked up at his daughter. "Alessi, sit down." This time, Alessi obeyed, sliding back into her seat. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline still flooding her system. She'd never done anything like that before, never stood up for anyone, never raised her voice, never let emotion override calculation. It had felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Maya brought their order a few minutes later, her hand steady but her eyes still a little too bright. When she set down Alessi's hot chocolate, she leaned in slightly and said very quietly, "You've got a fierce heart, baby. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Alessi looked up at her. This woman who worked too hard and had too little and smiled anyway, who raised a daughter alone and found joy in small things, who treated a strange, cold 6-year-old girl with warmth and patience and genuine affection. And Alessi realized with the clarity of a revelation that she didn't hate Maya. She loved her, not in the way she loved her father. That was duty and blood and obligation. This was different. This was choice. This was wanting someone to be happy, wanting to protect them, wanting to be near them not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The realization was terrifying, because love was weakness. Love was vulnerability. Love was giving someone the power to hurt you and trusting they wouldn't use it. Love was everything her father had warned her against. But as Maya walked away with that gentle smile, as Alessi wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug and breathed in cinnamon and chocolate, she couldn't make herself regret it, even if it was weakness, even if it was dangerous, even if it was wrong. She loved Maya Torres, and there was nothing she could do about it now. Vincent Romano stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, watching Alessi stare out the window at the December snow falling over their estate. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the diner, and his daughter had become someone he barely recognized, withdrawn, quiet, picking at her meals, going through the motions of her lessons without her usual sharp focus. "We need to talk, Piccola." Alessi turned from the window, her expression carefully neutral. At 6 years old, she already knew how to hide what she felt. Vincent had taught her that. Now he wondered if he'd taught her too well. "Sit." He gestured to her bed and she obeyed, folding her hands in her lap with perfect posture. Vincent pulled over her desk chair, sitting so they were eye level. "The waitress. Maya. You care about her?" It wasn't a question, but Alessi answered anyway. "She's nice to me." "She is," Vincent agreed. "But you need to understand something. People like us, we don't get close to people like them. It's not about being better or worse. It's about safety. For everyone." "I don't understand." Alessi's voice was small. "I have enemies, Alessi. Men who would hurt you to hurt me. If they knew you cared about Maya, they'd use that. They'd threaten her, hurt Emma, just to get to me through you." Vincent's voice was gentle but firm. "I can't protect everyone. I can barely protect you, Maya and her daughter. They're safer if we stay away." Tears welled in Alessi's eyes, the first Vincent had seen in years. "But she's different. She makes me feel—" "I know." Vincent's throat tightened. "But feelings don't matter if they get people hurt. You can't go back there. I'm sorry, but it's final." Alessi's face crumpled, and Vincent felt something break inside him, but he stood firm. This was for her own good, for Maya's good, even if it destroyed something precious in his daughter's eyes. 2 weeks later, on a snowy evening in early January, Vincent's phone rang with news that made his blood run cold. A rival family had been asking questions about a waitress at Rosie's diner. They'd seen Alessi's attachment during one of their visits. They were planning something. Vincent had a choice to make. Cut ties completely, safest for everyone, or bring Maya and Emma into his protection, admitting they mattered, making them permanent targets. He thought about his daughter's tears, about Maya's kindness, about the wife he'd lost who'd always chosen compassion over safety. And Vincent Romano made a decision that changed everything. Maya Torres answered her apartment door at 11 p.m. to find Vincent Romano standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Her heart hammered, every maternal instinct screaming danger. "We need to talk," Vincent said quietly. "It's about Alessi and your safety." 20 minutes later, Maya sat on her worn couch, Emma sleeping peacefully in the next room, while Vincent explained everything: a rival family, threats, surveillance, the terrible math of his world where caring about someone made them a target. "I can relocate you," Vincent said. "New city, new identity, money to start over. You'd be safe, but you'd never see Alessi again." Maya's hands shook. "And the other option? You stay. You let me protect you. Security, surveillance, everything you need. But you become part of this world. You and Emma both. There's no going back from that." Maya thought about the fierce little girl who'd stood on a booth seat to defend her, about the way Alessi's cold eyes warmed when Maya called her baby, about Emma, who deserved safety and normalcy, and a mother who didn't invite danger into their lives. "If I stay," Maya said slowly, "can I still be myself? Can I still teach her kindness?" Vincent's expression softened. "I think that's exactly what she needs." 3 months later, spring arrived in Chicago with sudden warmth and blooming trees. In Maya's apartment, now upgraded, secured, protected, Alessi sat cross-legged on the floor with Emma, helping the 4-year-old sound out words in a picture book. Security cameras watched discreetly from corners. A bodyguard waited outside, but inside, there was laughter. "You're really good at reading," Emma said, looking at Alessi with undisguised admiration. "Can you teach me?" "Of course," Alessi said, and her smile was genuine, unguarded. That's what big sisters do. Maya watched from the kitchen, her heart full. Vincent stood in the doorway, and their eyes met across the room, an understanding passing between them. They'd built something impossible here, a bridge between two worlds, a family formed not by blood, but by choice. She's different now, Vincent said quietly to Maya. Softer, happier. So are you, Maya replied. And it was true. The dangerous man who'd first walked into her diner now smiled more easily, held his daughter more gently, allowed himself moments of peace. The doorbell rang. Marco, the bodyguard, checked the security feed and nodded. Pizza delivery. I ordered dinner. They gathered around Maya's small dining table. Vincent, Alessi, Maya, Emma, and Marco standing watchfully by the door. An unlikely family, protected by walls of steel and surveillance, but held together by something stronger. Love. Messy, complicated, dangerous love. Alessi looked around the table, at her father teaching Emma to fold a pizza slice properly, at Maya laughing at some joke Marco had made, at the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. Maya, Alessi said softly. Yes, baby. Can this be forever? Maya reached across the table and took Alessi's small hand in hers. Forever is a long time, but as long as you need me, I'm here. Vincent's hand covered both of theirs. We all are. That's what family means. Outside, snow began to fall again, the last snowfall of winter, promising spring's arrival. Inside Maya's apartment, in the warm glow of lamplight and laughter, Alessandra Romano learned that strength wasn't about standing alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let people in. And sometimes the family you needed wasn't the one you were born into. It was the one that called you baby and meant it. The one that chose you back. The one that built bridges across impossible distances and dared to call it home.